and welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to conversations with people who want to grow and spread empathy throughout the world. Well, I am so delighted to be joined today by Rachel Kiddell-Monroe. I've had a long time girl crush on you, and I know that we share some students in common through the years, and whenever I get students from international development who have taken classes with you, they say to me, "Oh my gosh, have you met Rachel yet? You remind me of her." And I always think that that's the biggest compliment. I know they adore you, and I've had the pleasure of seeing you give presentations. I recently just rewatched your astounding TED Talk, which I encourage anybody who's watching this to go back and see, and I'll make sure to include it in the video notes. You know, I was refreshing my memory about your actual background, and I'm just going to pick up from the LinkedIn profile that, you know, the framing you use, which I think is beautiful, is that you're passionate about social justice and finding ways to show humanity and solidarity for people in our planet. And you're using your background as a lawyer and an activist to do that. And you are also the founder of SeeChange, an organization that supports communities and to empower themselves and issues in their own way, which I look really forward to talking about in a few minutes. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's wonderful, Anita, to see you.
In watching your TED Talk again, you said something so compelling, so goosebumpy inducing that I want to just bring it back to the front of this conversation as a frame. You say, "One world with everything to give and one world with nothing to lose." What did you mean by that?
You get to this situation in the world when you're looking at some of the context, some of the humanitarian context that I've seen, and you see this juxtaposition of these two worlds together. You have a world where we have everything. Look at us in the COVID crisis here in Montreal. We have our houses. We're able to quarantine easily. It really hasn't been such a big deal for many of us. But then you look at other people in our same community or in other communities where they have an extremely difficult time to do things like quarantine or keep distance or keep social distance or even to get hold of masks. And then you have this clash. And it's as if these two worlds don't see each other. And so when you can put this onto the really big context, like something like the Rwanda genocide, which is what I was talking about in the talk, where people are looking in at what was happening in Rwanda and seeing what was happening, and they had so much capacity to do something to prevent it and to stop it, but they didn't. They just watched it. And so you have this sense of like we're living in whether you call it the North, whether you call it the rich countries, whether you call it the high income countries or the upper middle income countries. So many of us have so much capacity to make a change and bring difference. And then we have everything to give. But then the communities on the other side who are there living in extremely difficult circumstances, they have nothing to lose. So you get this extraordinary paradox in the world between these two faces of our societies.
Yeah, so as a follow-up to that, I think that there are two layers to what you're bringing up. One is just the issue of knowing what's going on in the world. And I'm finding, like, even among young people who have access to news 24/7, I mean, we all do, right, on our phones, that some news is not penetrating. It's not penetrating the many layers of, you know, whatever's going on in the world because there's just so much being jammed at us. You know, I feel like there's a sense that we're not hearing the stories of people who are suffering in a way that actually could help us understand that there is something we can do. That's the first level. And then the second level is when you actually do hear about the suffering that's going on in the world, there's almost a sense of paralysis, like, what can I possibly do in the face of that? So I just wonder if you would comment on that.
I think that maybe looking at a very specific context would be a really good way to look at that. So if you look at the context of the refugee and migrant flows, for instance, I think there you see this sense of we see everything through a certain lens, often a media lens. Often the information that we receive is filtered in a certain way. But we also, there's a missing empathy link in it, because when you actually go to these places, when I went to Greece, or I went to the refugee camps in France, or I went to Central America or to Mexico, and I actually talk to the people who fled from terrible violence and terrible situations, you can't help but say, well, this is another human being. I need to help. There's something that I can do. And it can be as little as reaching out a hand and just saying, I'm here with you. Let me help you in this moment in time, or give you a hug, or whatever it is. Or it can be on a much grander scale. But I think that we miss that link. And I think it's often because we always think these problems are so far away. But in fact, these problems are right on our doorstep. If you look here in Montreal, we have people arriving in Montreal who fled from terrible circumstances, whether they fled from extreme violence and conflict in Central America, whether they fled from extreme poverty in different parts of Latin America or parts of Africa. They arrive here in Montreal and they're not seen. It's like they're invisible. And there's so much that we can do to make them visible, to hear the stories, and to really be able to reach out to them. So I think that that's a really clear example of how we could do something there. I forgot what your first part of your question is.
Just that there's so much information that we're bombarded with on a daily basis that some of those stories don't even get to us.
No, they don't get to us, and I think that there is an information overload. We're talking about infodemia now with COVID, and it's extremely hard for people to pass through. But the other part of it as well, I think we're in information bubbles. If we look at how all the algorithms and everything are done, I mean, I receive plenty of stories about migrant stories and personal stories on all these things. It could be my neighbours; they don't receive any of that information. So we're really caught in this system of being controlled by algorithms, and which controls everything from how our Facebook pages are liked and so on. And breaking out of that is very challenging. So it means that people actually have to be active in terms of information rather than just being passive recipients. We need to go out and make sure that we do get information.
So your life has been in service to humanitarian causes, and as an activist and as a voice for the disenfranchised. I wonder whether or not you could speak to the idea of somebody who might be tempted to do something outside of their general comfort zone, but is totally afraid of what that might mean for them, from the point of view of, if you have lived through before, during, and after the Rwandan genocide, and you've been to Greece, and you've been to all these countries and sat with people who are facing suffering, that there is an emotional toll that comes with that. It's called, some people refer to it as compassion fatigue or PTSD, secondary PTSD. What would you say to those people who are a little afraid of what it might mean for themselves?
I can only speak about my experience, but when I meet people, they energize me. So whenever I go somewhere like to visit people who've maybe crossed the border from Canada, from the US to Canada, or from Honduras to Mexico, or from Libya to Greece, when I sit and talk to them, the energy and the power of those conversations is absolutely reviving for me. It doesn't feel like a trauma. It feels rather that I've been able to help someone to relieve their trauma. Because often what people need is they need to speak about it. They need to feel that someone cares. They need to feel that someone's available, that someone can listen. We don't always have answers. People know that there aren't always answers to everything. But just to feel that people cares is huge. So for me, I find that a really inspiring, and I feel that really empowering, and I find it very invigorating to do it. So I think that there is a fear. I understand the fear, but from my side, I think if we can get through that fear and just think about how would it be if you were in that situation? What would it be if you were the one who had to flee from somewhere? What would you want someone to do for you? And then try to do what you would want that person to do for you. I think that's probably the easiest way to think about it.
And what are the gateways that you would recommend if somebody wanted to do something like that?
I mean, here in Montreal, there are lots of amazing initiatives working with refugees and asylum seekers. We have things like the Refugee Centre. We have Action pour les réfugiés. We have all sorts of activities like Médecins du Monde, looking after migrants. There's even these things called welcome sessions that have been set up by a group of volunteers to welcome people. So there's plenty of initiatives to be able to get engaged in. And I think those are really good first steps. You know, we don't have to travel overseas and go very far to be able to help. You know, individuals can find a cause that really means something to. For me, refugees and migrants is something that really compels me because of my international work. It could be that someone else is really interested in the plight of girls or young children or Indigenous peoples. Here in Canada, we have such a massive issue around Indigenous peoples, and so many people here in Montreal who've really come upon hard times, who need support and help. This is another way that we can be engaged. I think as individuals, we can really look to, well, what do I feel comfortable with? Some people it's to donate to a cause that they really care about. Someone else it can be actually to go and get involved in it. So find the issue that you really care about, that makes you feel like, oh, maybe that's something that I feel I could make a difference in and also would enrich my own life. And go from there.
So you talked about feeling invigorated and empowered through the work that you do. You know, it's you know, so much of activism, I think, is about challenging the status quo and being political by nature. And yet so much of, you know, the empathy work, humanitarian work, I feel connects with some deep spiritual phenomenon. Do you feel that the energy of the politics and the spirituality kind of coalescing? And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Oh, I absolutely do. I think we're in a strange world now. In some ways, we feel that we're so connected, but through all these very physical and technological means, we're connected. Through Facebook, we're connected. Through WhatsApp, we use the word connection all over the place. In my view, connection is actually something much more deep. And I think this is where the humanity comes in. There is a spiritual connection that brings us all together, of whatever background we are, wherever we are in the world. And humanity, for me, is really one of the defining features of that. When we can tap in, when I tap into my humanity, when I talk to somebody and I see them as another human being rather than seeing them as a refugee, or seeing them as white, or seeing them as black, or seeing them as a former soldier, or, you know, a former nurse or a nurse. If I can get rid of all those labels that we put on people and just look at the person, we have a connection. We will have a connection. We come from a universal source, if you like, without getting too woo-woo about it. But this is what connects us as human beings, and there's an energy that passes between us. And that's what I found. Wherever I've been in the world, I always go and sit down with people and just have a laugh with them and have a giggle. And just they look at me and they're like, oh, she's just like us. Maybe I can't even speak their language, but I'll find a way. We'll always find a way to be able to communicate. And often it's through food, through having a cup of tea or a coffee, laughing about something the children are doing, all things that we can relate to, laughing about our husbands being a pain in the kitchen, you know, whatever it is, with always something that we can connect on. Especially for me as a woman, I find the connection with other women really, really powerful. And then, of course, with children, there's always the connection through play. And all the things that you can talk about with them through play, and just getting down on your hands and knees and playing with them, or taking the football and joining in. And so I think just making those efforts to be our true selves. And I'm very childish, so I love to do things that make me laugh, and that's what makes me filled with joy. Then I think that's what we all have to do.
You also have a really strong opinion around the idea of humanitarian work or social work or impact work that is done with people as opposed to for people. I wonder if you could respond to that.
I think that this sense of being able to do things for other people is an outdated, and I would even say very colonial approach to assistance, to aid. It comes from this idea of charity, charity. I am the fortunate one, therefore I am going to bestow my beneficence onto you, unfortunate one. It really comes from that. And, you know, in this, especially in this era that we're in now of Black Lives Matter, of dismantling structural racism, dismantling gender bias and all these things that we're doing, it's absolutely critical that we start to change the way that we all relate to each other. We're all in this together, and we have to build the solutions together. You cannot rely on one group to build a solution for another when people in themselves are extremely extremely powerful. They understand their context. They know what they need. What the problem is that there are barriers to them being able to do the things that they need to do in order to be able to meet their own needs. So we need to start really changing the way that we see. And this, for me, is absolutely how we dismantle colonialism and colonial approaches and systems.
So what advice would you give to young people? I always hear that they want to travel and do volunteer work abroad. So what sort of advice do you offer so that they keep that frame in mind?
Always listen. First of all, listen to people and hear what they're saying, and try to hear it without your unconscious biases. Know what your unconscious biases are before you go, and think about it really, really hard. Listen to there's amazing books to read now. There's some amazing podcasts to listen to, all working on this, especially me as a white woman, and realizing I have so much unconscious bias. I've spent hours now listening and talking and trying to challenge. And I know, Anita, you're doing exactly the same thing in your classes, trying, how we're trying to approach things in a different way. I can't deny who I am, but I can learn what my biases are. And so I think this is the first critical thing for anyone to do if they want to go out into other countries. And then after that is listen to people, engage people in conversations, ask them, what do you want? What do you need? And understand, why do they need that? So, if you're going there as a health worker and they actually say, the most important thing that I need right now is I need some food because I haven't got any food on the table. Well, listen to that and see, well, isn't there a way that we can do the health and make sure they get access to food? Is that about getting them in touch with another organization? Is there something you can do? But not to just be siloed. We never, all of these issues, there's so much intersectionality in the work that we do. And then I suppose the third part of it for me would be to go in humility, to be humble, and not to expect that you're going to bring some radical solution or it's all going to be answered and everything is going to be fine after you've gone. My mantra to myself is that whenever I'm somewhere, I actually feel that I'm given more than I give, always, because I get so much from the people that I work with, so much understanding, so much more insight into into the human condition, into understanding why things are like they are, and recognizing the power that people have. So I always walk away richer.
Now you are busy with a new initiative that you've called SeeChange. Could you tell us how that came to be and what you're doing now? Because it's very, very, very exciting.
Yeah, I find it really exciting too. So after 30 odd years in humanitarian work, and having started from the ground level, working in Indonesia with indigenous groups, and then spending most of my career with Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, and ending up at the highest level of governance of MSF on the international board. After that sort of cycle of 30 years, I was like, okay, I need to go back to the beginning. I need to now take all of that experience and bring it back to the ground. And I feel like this project for me is a culmination of all my experience, because I realized through everything that I've done that what really matters and what can really bring change is the community itself. The community has everything it needs to bring a solution. But as I was saying before, there are barriers to them doing that and people who don't listen to them. And I think that if I look at the way I see the future, and I see the future of humanitarian assistance, it's got to be broken down. We can't anymore live with these sort of megalithic organizations that have these generic responses that apply all over the place. Communities are distinct, diverse, unique, and they need their own approaches. So as I was finishing my time on the MSF International Board, I heard about this tuberculosis crisis in the north of Canada. amongst the Inuit, where Inuit in Nunavut are about 300 times more likely to get tuberculosis than any Canadian-born non-Indigenous person. And I was like, how is that possible? That this very old-fashioned airborne disease, very similar to COVID actually, it passes by droplets from one to the other, but it's bacterial. And we've been eliminating that in so many countries and dealing with it all over the world. How come we can still have that in Canada? I mean, this is a super rich country. No one in the South even gets vaccines against tuberculosis anymore. So as I started to dig further, I decided to contact people up there. And eventually we launched a project in partnership with a Inuit Inuit-led organization called Illisatsavik, which is a community organization based in one community. And with them, what we're trying to do is introduce this community-first approach to addressing the tuberculosis crisis. And what does that mean? It means that you listen to the community. You find out from the community what are their traditional ways of working, what do they understand, what do they need to understand, but most importantly, recognizing their historical trauma, specifically related to tuberculosis. And this is a massive issue in Inuit communities because of what happened in the 1950s when the Canadian government actually sent ships up around the Canadian Arctic to test people for tuberculosis. And if they were positive, they were kept on the ship. And if they were negative, they were taken off, which meant that families were separated, meant that children were separated from their mothers. It was horrific. They were brought down to the south, put into sanatoriums, which were very similar to residential schools. So people were extremely badly treated. It's very traumatizing. And many who went back to their communities faced real difficulties going back. And so then when you come here in, 2020, talking about tuberculosis, it brings back all of that trauma that those communities live through. And that's an intergenerational trauma because it's passed on from grandmother to child to child to child. So we're really trying to bring that sort of trauma-informed approach, which Illisatsavik has been doing for many years on addictions issues and so on. And we're trying to bring that to tuberculosis and present that as a different way of addressing the issue. And now with COVID, we've kind of taken that idea and taken it more globally. We've developed a roadmap called a Community First Roadmap for for COVID-19, and basically trying to provide a roadmap so that communities can empower themselves to be prepared for if COVID comes into their community, or if they already have COVID, or if COVID is close by. And it's really addressed at sort of the more vulnerable and isolated communities. It could be Indigenous communities, it could be migrant or refugee communities, it could be marginalized communities like LGBTQI. So it's really addressed there. And what we do is provide a sort of step-by-step approach to how to, build resilience in your community towards something like COVID-19. And then we're also looking at how to recover and reimagine from COVID-19 and what does that mean for communities in the way that they move forward. So all of that to say, and now we're doing that in Latin America, in communities in Honduras, in Guatemala, in Mexico, and the communities love this tool. And they love this tool because it puts the power back in the place where it should be. It gives the power back to the community. And so now we have a community in Honduras who's implementing that, and they're doing, and they said, but this is great, but you know what, we don't have any masks and we don't have any disinfectant. So we've done a fundraising campaign and we raised some money, and that money, we just sent it down to Honduras to the community, and they're now buying the masks and the soap and the disinfectant they need to really protect themselves. So we're trying to respond to what the community needs, and at the same time give them a tool that can live beyond COVID. I mean, this tool could be used for many different things. It could be used for a community to emergency prepare for any future pandemic or any outbreak of any disease. So it's a very exciting approach. I am really enjoying it.
So if people want to support the scaling of this tool around the world, how can they help you?
Well, they can go and have a look at our website at SeeChangeInitiative.org. We also have a very active Facebook page, and on there you can find our Community First fundraiser. We're also on Instagram and Twitter, and we have an amazing communications team pushing that out. And support would be extremely welcome, because it's really something that supports communities directly. We're working with 15 different communities in Latin America now. And we have also communities in Kenya now who've reached out to us and asked for help in implementing this roadmap. So all of that support will really result in meaningful change on a community level.
So I'll be sure to include all the links for any readers who want to follow up with that. As a final question, Rachel, so there's climate change, mm-hmm. and there's COVID, and the geopolitics of the United States right now, and Black Lives Matter, and everything that you could possibly imagine that's bringing about what's happening in 2020. What do you see in the future?
I see hope. I see COVID-19 as the ultimate disruptor that's finally exposed the inequities and the cracks of our system in a way that no one can ignore anymore. I don't believe there's going back. I think there's only going forward. Some people call it the new normal. I don't really like that phrase very much, but I think that there are new beginnings coming. And I think it's exciting, because I think that we've been living for decades, even more, knowing that there is something fundamentally wrong with the way that our societies are working. And we were not able, as human beings, benefiting from that setup, benefiting from that structure, we were not able to change it. There was always that question. I'm always there. How can I be doing these things yet I live in a nice house in Montreal? Shouldn't I be living in a shack too? And it's like, no. There was so much dissonance between what's happening. There's so much concentration of wealth. I think now it has forced those cracks to be open. We have to change the way that our system works. We can't go back. And going forward, I think, brings optimism, because now all those voices that have never been heard before and have never been listened to, they're going to come in with all their variety and diversity and all these different ways of doing and different ways of understanding. It's extremely exciting. I'm just going to learn so much from it. And I really believe that's the only way that we can bring meaningful change. So I think this is a great opportunity coming. It's scary. And I acknowledge that for a lot of people, for most of us, for myself included, it is a scary time because we don't know. And for human beings to live in uncertainty is extremely difficult. But to get through that, I think we have to come together. We have to care for each other and listen to each other and be open, and have empathy. And with that, we can really move forward into a much more beautiful world.
Well, goosebumps. Thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon sharing those thoughts with me and everyone who's watching. Have a great day.
Thank you.